The Manchester Chartist, Chapter 2. How they managing, Daniel? Aye, Bess, I'll be fine. I'll just let on if they need relief, love. I've men queuing up to carry banner. It's a remarkable turnout, and weather couldn't be better, lass. We had Charlie Sykes at Millgates looking out for us. He's just caught us up and made his report. Our Deadrow had done as we asked and locked gates. Charlie reckons only a couple of overlookers turned up, and they turned around when they realised Mill were locked. Unbeknownst to Daniel, a friend stood at Kersal Bar waiting for the Manchester contingent to march past Strangeways and up Bury New Road. Once it reached the bar, it would swing left onto Moor Lane, and from there onto Kersal Moor itself. Dead on 10:30, the trade union delegations from Manchester began their journey, headed by a lone bugler, on horseback. Immediately behind him marched a brass band, accompanied by a banner, proclaiming the 60 demands of the Charter: universal male suffrage, vote by ballot, abolition of the property qualifications for MPs, payment for MPs, equal electoral constituencies, annual parliaments. Members of the Manchester Political Union and the Manchester Suffrage Association, the joint sponsors of the rally, proudly walked behind. Next, following their own colourful banner, marched an army of tailors, 525 strong, easily counted because they comprised 105 files, each file 5 abreast. In their wake marched a myriad of other trades, each with their own banners and many led by bands. 400 members of the Steam Engine Friendly Society headed a contingent of untold numbers of blacksmiths, wheelwrights and millwrights. Following these came a large and boisterous crowd of handloom weavers, most of them Irish. Over 800 members of the Dyers and Dressers Union processed in their wake, followed by hundreds of powerloom weavers. The mass ranks of the Cotton Spinners Union appeared in their turn, with the Gibraltar Mill banner to the fore. And still they came, the Manchester Regiment of the Labouring Poor, an impoverished but jovial array of humanity, with the most radical participants, the shoemakers, marching in unison, as if going into battle, singing and laughing in the vanguard, their banners and flags, a riot of colour and revolutionary slogans. Old Tom Oldham looked on in amazement as the serried ranks passed him by at Kersal Bar. He checked the time the bugler reached him on his fob watch. It was over 40 minutes later before the last line of 5 of the Manchester contingent passed in front of him. They weren't marching slow. Tom reckoned they'd be doing at least 3.5 miles an hour. However, for argument's sake, he calculated the length of the column using the lower figure of 3 miles an hour. That meant 1 mile of people passed in 5 abreast every 20 minutes. So the Manchester contingent alone had been 2 miles long, and if they'd marched in single file, they'd have stretched for 10 miles. Onlookers had clapped and cheered them throughout the length of their promenade. The whole parade was a riot of colour, good-natured banter and laughter, accompanied by stirring music. The issues at stake were serious. The people participating setting out grim and determined, facing an enemy who regarded them as little more than animals, a pair of hands, to be put to work where their employers found it necessary to employ them, and cast aside to beg, steal, borrow or starve when they didn't. But the very act of combining together to stand up to win the same democratic rights as their masters and to end political corruption gave them a confidence that turned the whole occasion into a gigantic and exuberant festival. As they passed Kersal Bar, one of the shoemakers began to sing verses from Shelley's popular poem, The Mask of Anarchy, inspired by Peterloo. He began with Shelley's question, "What art thou, freedom?" His fellows joined in singing out the answer with great enthusiasm, much to the delight of their listeners. Thou art not, as impostors say, a shadow soon to pass away, a superstition and a name, echoing from the eaves of fame. For the labourer thou art bred, and a comely table spread, from his daily labour come, in a neat and happy home. Thou art clothes and fire and food, for the trampled multitude, knowing countries that are free, such starvation cannot be, as in England now we see. rise like lions after slumber, in unvanquishable number, shake your chains to earth like dew, which in sleep had fallen on you. Ye are many, they are few. Daniel hadn't spotted Tom standing on the opposite side of the road, but Tom had spotted Daniel. As soon as the last shoemaker had passed, he chased after to find the youngster and his wife, his worn-out, cotton-filled lungs forcing him to wheeze like an old steam engine. The moor soon became a heaving mass of tens of thousands of people, eager to listen to the words of the speakers, in particular those of the Irish Chartist and legendary owner of the Northern Star, Fergus O'Connor. Contingents from Salford, Lee, Oldham, Middleton, Bury, Rochdale, Stalybridge and Stockport, Ashton-under-Lyne and Droylsden, Unsworth and Bolton, Tottington and Eccles, together with representatives of the Macclesfield silkworkers, augmented the host of Manchester people. According to the Manchester Guardian, over 30 bands took part, providing musical entertainment. Bess Ackroyd felt overwhelmed, elated by the sheer number of women and children in attendance, although if she'd thought about it, she wouldn't have been so surprised. In most of the towns represented, women comprised an important, unsubstantial part of the textile mills workforce, as indeed did children, many mills employing boys and girls from the age of 9 and sometimes younger. The women in many ways suffered the brunt of pressures resulting from industrial accidents, the widespread domestic overcrowding, unsanitary and dangerous living conditions, and poor health, all too prevalent as a direct result of factory life and mechanisation. Cholera, typhus, scarlet fever and consumption, or tuberculosis as it became known, were common diseases. If a woman escaped them, she was expected to nurse and maintain the menfolk, children, and female relatives who weren't so lucky. Bess was overjoyed to see that the Gibraltar Mill contingent were not the only ones to miss out the word male from their demand for suffrage. The Bury contingent carried 13 flags, bearing the demands universal suffrage, votes by ballot, and labour the source of all wealth. Although the press ignored it, the speakers addressing the meeting chose not to mention it, and many of the male-dominated trade unions wouldn't acknowledge it, women were to the fore in organising behind the scenes. Without them, the great demonstration, later acknowledged as probably the most significant political event of the 19th century, wouldn't have been so successful. The women in the main made the banners, spoke out in the mills and in their unions, and organised the thousands of placards that had sprouted up on walls and posts for miles around the Manchester and Salford areas over the preceding weeks. The Manchester women Chartists had made an emotional appeal to their sisters of England, Ireland, Scotland and Wales, and raised over £50 as a result. This was a great deal of money. Young Bess Ackroyd was a skilled cotton operative, a spinner, and old Etherow was by no means the worst-paying mill owner in Manchester. In fact, he was one of the best payers. She started work at 6 in the morning and worked until 8. She then had half an hour for breakfast, which gave her time to go to Mary Upton's and breastfeed young Daniel. She returned to the mill and worked from 8:30 until 1, when again she was able to look after Daniel's and her own needs, before returning to her spinning mule at 2. From then on she worked through until 8:30 at night, save for half an hour at 5 to feed Daniel once more. She did this 6 days a week, except for Saturdays, when she finished work at 5. For a 69.5 hours labour, she received the princely sum of 14 shillings. In other words, to earn £50, she'd have to labour for near enough 1 year and 20 weeks. Daniel, Daniel! The lad looked around. What are you doing here, Tom? Let me get me breath back. Sit this hell down, old lad, Daniel said, taking his old friend by the arm, concerned by his wheezing. Nay, Daniel, if I sets down I might ne'er rise again. I'll be right in a minute. I thought I'd lost thee. You're the last person I expected to see after the lecture you gave me yesterday afternoon. Ah, well, I were wrong, I guess. I were being a mad arse, and I felt need to tell thee. I had a dream last night. He shook his head. It were uncanny. Me old father, goodness bless his soul, stole into me head whilst I were fast asleep. He looked as true to life as thou art to me now, Daniel. He looked at his friend, a rather grave, serious expression on his face. Get up off thy knees, Tom Oldham, he told me. If they canna do it for thyself, do it to honour me. Well, Daniel, as you see, I'm here, and I'm doing it for myself as well as me feyther, and thou art my witness, seeing as there's nae God to vouch for me. Good for thee, Tom. I'm reet pleased to see you, and so will I best be. We'll walk home together after meeting, and we'll feed you and make a reet fuss of you, so we will. He looks around searching for his wife. There you are, Bess, love. Look who's come to greet us. Bess's face broke into a beaming smile. Tom Oldham, of all people. You're thunny on bread, and that's an understatement. Come here. Give me a hug, the old devil. They've been neglecting us. I hasn't seen thee for weeks. Where have they been hiding? Old Tom, Bess and Daniel walked back to Manchester together. It was raining, but a blizzard would have failed to curb their spirits. They weren't exactly sure how many had attended the rally to endorse the People's Charter, but Tom assured them it far exceeded the 60,000 who'd been on St. Peter's Fields 19 years previously. Moreover, unlike Peterloo, it had been a perfect day. The weather remained dry for most of the event, and the authorities seemed to have learnt one lesson at least, and kept a low profile. They turned off Berry New Road onto Ducie Street. As they crossed Ducie Bridge to enter the area comprising the original township, by then commonly known as Old Town or Irish Town, Tom stopped. Let me show you something whilst we're here. They looked over the bridge's northern parapet to the Manchester bank of the Irk. The river's waters were black with effluent from a nearby dye works. They seemed to absorb all light, and the stench was almost intolerable. Both sides of the Irk at this point sported tanneries, size manufactories, numerous pigsties, a slaughterhouse, and tripe works, with clusters of slum dwellings in their shade. They followed Tom's pointing finger. In a deep gully between two high banks stood a large cluster of some of the most dilapidated and broken-down buildings of the town. That's Gibraltar, Tom said grimly. That's where the cholera epidemic of 1831 started. It was a slum then like it's a slum today, one of the worst slums in a slum town. The whole area was a mass of narrow courts, dominated by a large tannery some 8 stories high, 3 of which contained animal skins hung up and exposed to the open air. One of the first victims was an Irish lad, a mate of me feyther's, Tom said quietly. He'd fought in the Peninsular Wars under Wellesley, him who became Wellington. So many of British troops were Irish and didn't speak out but Irish. Their officers had to learn their language or use interpreters. Irish Michael were an interpreter and a war hero. He lost 3 times in Spain. He paused and looked at his friends. Irish get a lot of stick round here, but people forget why they're here in first place, dispossessed of the land and forced to serve a German king, or to work in mills as weavers or slave as navvies cutting canals and railways. Anyway, after Waterloo, when Napoleonic Wars finally ended, Michael was reduced to selling matches and lived in one of them cottages, alongside 3 other families in one room in Yon Allen Court. Cholera seized him on a Sunday and lad died on Wednesday. On that day, 5 other cases of cholera occurred amongst the inhabitants at same court. All were fatal, and cholera spread like wildfire through Irish Town. Houses should have been knocked down and area cleaned up, but they're still as bad as e'er they were, if not worse. There's pigs running free in them courts, feeding on garbage and offal, and there's all kinds of shit, and goodness only knows what else in our passages. They reckon rats have fled up Long Millgate to Ancoats, conditions aren't so bad. He shook his head in disgust. Year after that we got the Great Betrayal, what Meisters call the Great Reform Act. They got us to parade and drill on Kersal Moor year in year out after Peterloo, to put fear of God up landed gentry, promising us working man would have right to vote as well as them. But once they got vote for middle classes, they turned their backs on us who won it for 'em. Fergus O'Connor were dead right today when he said Parliament were a set of vagabond cowards, the Whigs devils and the Tories devils in hell. Aye, Tom, thou art right, lad, Bess agreed with a wry smile. We need to sweep vipers out of their parliamentary nest and replace 'em with good honest working folk, and hold 'em to annual account to stop 'em becoming warped and adopting ways of rich folks.